Hi there, thanks again for joining us. Today we're going to be discussing restoration. This is essentially what happens when you run out of status in Canada. A restoration might be an option to you for those who wish to continue their status in Canada or just want a little bit more time. So essentially the scenario is, for example, you've come here on a visitor visa or a study permit or a work permit for that matter, a temporary document essentially, and it's expired. For whatever the reason. Perhaps you have stayed beyond the expiry date of your status document, or you're no longer attending the university or college for which you obtained your study permit, or you are no longer with the employer for which you obtained your work permit. Whatever your reason might be, just because you've lost this status essentially doesn't mean you're immediately required to vacate Canada. So there's a couple things to consider. Once your status is technically over, regardless of whether or not you no longer qualify for that status or you have overstayed that status, you essentially have a 90-day grace period for which you're able to figure out what you're going to do. So again, example, your visitor visa has expired and you've been here for 6 months. That means you've established some sort of way of life in Canada, as that is a rather long period of time. So Citizenship and Immigration Canada allows you these 90 days to either pack up your things and essentially effect your departure, or figure out how you're going to maintain or produce some other sort of status. So you essentially have these 90 days to apply for what's called a restoration. This means that you're either applying to change your status from something like a visitor to a study permit or to a work permit, or you are applying to extend that status. So again, example, you're here on a visitor visa and you just want a little bit more time to visit with family, or you have an upcoming special event. Or at the same time, while you're here as a visitor, you've enrolled into a university and want to study. Therefore, you apply to change your conditions to either a visitor or study permit, and you're allowed to submit that application within those 90 days. Now, if you submit the application for restoration prior to the cutoff of that 90-day mark, you're here on what's called implied status. This means that the status that you're applying for is yours until a decision is made on the application. So if you were here as a visitor and you were applying to extend your stay as such, you can remain in Canada under this implied status until a decision is made on this application. At the same time, if a work permit or study permit is expiring and you've submitted this application, you're still able to work in Canada and still able to study in Canada until a decision is made on this extension. Now, if you've passed the 90-day mark and you're trying to apply for a restoration, you still can, however, you've lost the ability to have implied status. This means that you must stop whatever it is that you're doing, whether it's a study permit or a work permit, until a decision is made on the matter. If the decision is negative, they will essentially advise you that it's time now to exit Canada and give you a date for which you're expected to depart. Now, you can argue that further if you wish, but for the most part, it's kind of the end of the line at that point, and you're essentially supposed to voluntarily depart from Canada. Now, I don't need to tell you what happens if you overstay beyond this date. It means that now you are no longer voluntarily departing, which this means can then turn into a removal order, something like a deportation or a departure order, and you don't want that, right? You want to make sure that you comply with all CIC's requests so that any future applications are not affected. These are some of the things you should consider when attempting to restore your status. Now, keep in mind that you have 90 days essentially to restore that status. So if you're trying to extend your stay as long as possible, we might suggest waiting until the very last day to submit your application for extension. So you then bought yourself 90 days, or I should say 89 days, and then subsequent another however long for the application to be reviewed and assessed and a decision is made. So regardless of whether or not you intend on staying longer than your validity, at least you've bought yourself that much time. Just a little tip I'll share with you. So in any event, you have those 90 days, just as a recap, you have 90 days to either apply for an extension or to change your conditions. So when your visa expires, don't think that you have to rush out of Canada. CIC takes into account that everyone has a different situation, and it's reasonable to expect that people need a little bit of time to sort their matters out in Canada before they depart. Thanks very much for joining us.